Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Tomorrow podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Dirk Horig.
Hi, everybody.
And we're also very fortunate to be joined by Drew Lau. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to start just by giving us all a quick overview of your career, how you came to Mobify? Just give us an overview of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career as a software engineer on the technical side. Worked for a couple 3-letter companies until I realized I didn't understand what was going on there. I was too young. It was all enterprise software, which I had no real connection to. So when I moved to Vancouver, I ended up meeting the Elastic Path team, who, as you know, is in the commerce space as well, and joined when there were about 20 people. And I stayed there for 9 years. I did a whole bunch of different roles, from solution architect to leading the technical pre-sales team, product architecture, and eventually I got into product management after a very long stint in pre-sales. And when that happened, I just loved building product. I realized that the best way to grow a company was to be involved in the product development process. And that's where we got really far into just headless commerce and the concept of decoupling back end and front end for customer agility. And that's what attracted me to just, how to look at the commerce industry as something beyond the next step of monolithic kind of on-premise installs. So when a couple of friends moved to Mobify, they kind of came knocking and said, "Hey, we got something cool going on here. It's unique in that it's focused entirely on mobile, but they're really smart people, and they're just looking for some product people to take them to the next step." So from that perspective, I joined the Mobify team, and in this case, it's kind of flip side of the headless commerce equation. At Elastic Path, we're building all the hypermedia APIs, running the back end of the commerce system, and being ready for IoT and mobile devices, but not the front end experience at all. At Mobify, we decided that we're going to build that front end experience that should be on top of all these e-commerce systems, whether they're ready for APIs or not. We can build the best experience and do that mobile first. So that's what attracted me to Mobify, is that I've always loved the user experience, the kind of the touchy feely parts of this, and after working on APIs for so long in Elastic Path, it was like, okay, it's time to go see something that's closer to what the shoppers are actually using, and give that a shot. So that's where we are now.
Let's talk a little bit more about Mobify and how you provide this mobile customer experience. So what are the products and services that Mobify is offering?
Yeah, so Mobify has been a company under transformation. Right now, we offer one platform, one product. That's really that simple. And really is a platform that provides a bunch of different technologies for building the best mobile first type experience. So the core flagship product is something called Progressive Web App. It is a relatively new set of technologies that the browser vendors are supporting, and we build a bunch of technologies around that. We have things like Accelerate Mobile Pages. We have a hybrid native app platform, and our goal is to build app-like experiences mainly using web technologies, and do that for retailers and their system integrators in a way that they can just launch these new experiences within 3 months and get it out the door, and just not be hung up on year-long projects trying to redesign their entire front end. So we don't have our own services team. We partner with a lot of the big agencies and a lot of the kind of very innovative agencies out there to go build these projects and put them out in front of shoppers. And so far, that's worked well for us.
No, that sounds great. And as you already mentioned, PWAs or progressive web apps, for those that are not familiar with that, maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into it, what that actually is.
Yeah, so progressive web apps have been a very new concept. I think when I joined Mobify roughly about 3 years ago, we were just starting that journey. And at that point, the Google Chrome team came knocking and said, "Hey, we have this new set of browser APIs available based on something called the Service Worker, and we think you can create really cool mobile experiences with it." So we convinced one of our early customers to go try it out. We did a couple of POCs, and the whole concept behind Progressive Web Apps, as we found, was let's make app-like experiences via web technologies. So we found that customer expectations kind of shifted based on just the presence of native apps in app stores. So when you look at mobile users, everyone's used to using their Instagram, their Snapchat, their different chat applications, their favorite applications, which are, super fast to load. They're super snappy. They have great user experiences. They take advantage of all the things on your device. And then they go to your website, that's a responsive website, and then they have to go buy something, and it's everything opposite from the experience they're used to. So we started seeing shoppers demand the same experience they get out of their native apps on any site that they want. And that's kind of the goal of progressive web apps is to try to mimic that same app-like experience, but you don't have to run Android team and an iOS team just to build that out. And it's really based on something called progressive enhancement. So with progressive enhancement as a philosophy, it's basically let's try to build the greatest experience for you given your context. So if you have a great $1,000 mobile device and it is running the latest OS and you've given permissions to track your location and get push notifications, you're going to get a great experience tailored towards that. But if you're a user, say in an emerging market, and you're on a $50 device running one of the smaller versions of Android, you should still get a great experience overall. It'll just have a couple of differences in terms of just trying to make it as fast as possible and so on. So it's trying to make these great experiences just universally accessible, regardless of what kind of context you come in from.
And given today's technology, can users tell the difference versus native, or I guess what are the differences there?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So when the progressive web is kind of defined in terms of the core attributes, it's really a 4-letter acronym that you'll see the Google Chrome team and a lot of other people in the space like us kind of promote. It's based on FIRE. So what we talk about there is it has to be fast. So it has to hold your customer's attention. It has to load fast. It has to be fast to navigate through. So if I need to add something to my cart, that should be as fast as possible. It has to be integrated, so you have to be able to take advantage of, let's say, the GPS device on your phone, or the push notifications coming through. We want to be reliable. So if you're offline, you're in the tube in London, and you lose your connection, you should still be able to navigate parts of the app. When you look at that, when you have your Facebook app, if you're offline and you're underground, you still have some limited functionality to be able to post things and see some previously loaded content. There's no reason why your website shouldn't be able to do the same. And then engagement, we want something that's free of fiction. It's super relevant. It's jankless. It doesn't feel like it's lagging behind when you're trying to kind of scroll up, scroll down. And if you kind of accomplish those 4 things, it is as app-like as you could expect based on something that's running over the web and running through a browser. I think that will get even more interesting in the next couple of years as the Android team and the Chrome team kind of integrate things further, and as we start to see the Apple team decide their strategy of how we're going to support more of the progressive web apps in Safari versus their own app store strategy. So there's strong expectations that this will be something amazing, and will just reduce the time it takes to build these great apps. And we're starting to see a lot of progress around there.
So when would you recommend to a customer using your native app versus using your progressive app, or vice versa? So is there still a need for a native app, or is that now changing over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So the way we try to frame that is should it be web app or native app? Do what's important for your customer is kind of what we're going for there. So, be customer centric. If your customer wants to meet you in a native app because they love the brand and they want to go download from the App Store, cool. Make sure you have that available. If they're more infrequent purchaser and they only come to your site once a year, they're probably not going to download your app. And that's most likely a bigger audience for you. So you should build the great experience for that. And ideally, you should be able to have both. There's no reason you have to choose one or the other if you do it right. But that's the struggle most retailers have, is they don't have the team or the budget to do both. So, how can you find a way to kind of create both using the same technologies is what we're looking at there.
Right. And I've seen progressive web apps on the Gartner hype cycle, right? The infamous hype cycle showing the adoption curve of all new technologies. Where is it right now on that, and why is it there?
It's interesting. So it's on the top of the hype cycle for 3 different hype cycles, which for me is a bit unprecedented. I don't think I've seen something at the top of the hype cycle all at the same time across 3 of them, which is weird. I don't know. I think most of them have cited the fact that Apple added support for progressive web apps in Safari 11.3.1, I believe was the version. And that kind of vaulted it to the top hype cycle. For me, I disagree a little bit. I don't think it's quite at the top of the hype cycle. We're starting to see in the last 6 months, last year, all the major brands invest in progressive web apps. So if you've looked at the last couple of months, Starbucks has launched a PWA, Twitter has launched a PWA, Tinder has launched one. Facebook is the biggest kind of name that went live with the PWA over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And Uber, Lyft, and our customers like Lancome and Debenhams have all launched their PWAs within the last 1 to 2 year periods with great results. But I don't think it's quite mainstream yet. Those are still teams that have had to carve out a lot of budget and either spin up their own teams and build up their own skill sets to build these. But it's not like something that's across all the retailers, all the different kind of brands out there just yet. So I still think that there's another year or so before we're truly at the top of the hype cycle where we start seeing these amazing results. And then we're going to go hit that nice trough of that we expect. And then we'll hit mainstream. So, it's a good place to be, but it's not, I think it's a bit ahead of its time to think it's at the top of the life cycle right now.
Drew, I got a question. I'm currently on your website. I'm reading here about AMPs, accelerated mobile pages. What actually is it? Accelerated sounds great, right? Nobody would want to have limited mobile pages. What is it actually? And is it a separate product that you're offering, or is it part of every product?
So with our platform, we're a SaaS platform. So we kind of deliver all the experiences for you. So we have the PWA experiences that's served off for our content delivery network. And we have also this other product called Accelerate Mobile Pages. And this is just a different set of technologies geared towards generally the same problem of just creating really fast and amazing mobile experiences. This comes from the AMP open source project, also coming from one of the Google teams, but it's a kind of a different Google team. And you've probably seen this in your search results from Google over the last couple of years, where you see a nice little lightning bolt. Traditionally, it's been targeted towards publishers and kind of newspapers who just want to have an article, a newspaper article, show up really quickly. So what we've seen here is pages just load way too slow, and a lot of that is because marketing teams want to have all these advertising and tracking pixels and all these third-party tags on their sites. And they're used to that because it gives them a lot of interesting information. And for the most part, they're there because you could skip over your tech team and launch, new integrations and use your tag manager. And that's great for marketing teams. Helps them go fast. What happens is, though, it's not very customer centric in that your mobile experience takes way too long to load. So I think what we're looking at there is the average site on mobile on an average device, average network takes about 19 seconds to load. And our human attention span isn't that long. You wait 19 seconds and you're just going to be frustrated. So overall goals of PWAs and AMP is really load pages as fast as possible. Kind of the goal in the short term is to make sure all pages are interactive within 5 seconds on an average network, average device. With AMP, when we launched that, it's essentially a subset of HTML. You kind of live within the constraints of a smaller set of HTML and a couple web components, and that's intentional to promote really speed of launching this. And when you do that and you run through the AMP cache and you have your own kind of AMP pages with kind of blessed integrations into the marketing tags and stuff that you still kind of want, you end up with crazy fast load time. So what we found is when we launched AMP for our customers, they were about 45 times faster to load for real users compared to even our PWAs, which load pretty fast already from a time to interactive point of view. So what we've decided to do was let's create landing pages based in AMP. That's going to load super fast. And then when that initial page is loaded and the customers are kind of browsing through that, when they click through, we'll take them to the progressive web app, which we can load in the background. And they kind of get the best of both worlds in that they get a really immersive app-like experience with the PWAs, but they get a super, super fast load time with AMP. And they just generally fit together really well. So AMP to PWAs, or as I like to call them, FLAMPs, kind of combine, is just a super set of just amazing mobile-centric technologies.
And what are some business results of using these? So forever there have been some metrics around improving page view time and the impact that has on conversion rates and things like that. But what types of business results are you actually seeing from your customers by adopting these newer technologies and improving the performance so much?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you look at the results that are published generally out there, our customer base generally sees anywhere from 20 to 30% uplift in mobile revenue, and that depends on obviously how unfriendly was your previous site, and that's kind of the range there. Even like the best responsive site that we usually kind of turn and convert into a progressive web app, we'll still see a good 20% lift. That generally matches what Google tends to say about their average across their PWA sites as well. Their number they tend to show off at Google I/O and so on is like, generally 20% uplift in conversion rate is what they tend to promote, which, if you think about it, it's when's the last time we saw a technology that's just purely let's redo the front end experience that results in that lift. And usually you'll have to go invest in some larger, several month project that completely reduce your whole stack for a chance at something that can lift your revenue like that. And that's now interesting because since mobile traffic has exceeded desktop traffic and mobile revenue is crossing over with desktop revenue, that's where we're starting to get a lot of focus from the market in terms of here's something we need to pay attention to. So that's kind of the ultimate business metric is just pure revenue. There's a lot of other underlying metrics that we tend to focus on. And I know a lot of retailers are just purely focused on conversion rate. And I think that's interesting in that it's a nice metric to look at, but I think a lot of times it's also the wrong metric to look at. So why conversion rate in mobile generally has not been great in the past is just poor user experience, and user experience comes down to like really slow sites and also just not taking advantage of what's available on a mobile device. So, for example, if you get through checkout, it takes really long to load, and there's like 5 pages of forms to fill out, and you're not pulling up the right keyboard type when you're typing in your name versus your address versus your credit card details. You're not using the camera or Apple Pay or Google Pay to go speed up the checkout process. You're on a mobile device, you're going to get distracted. Either you have to get on your bus and you can't finish your transaction, or your baby at home is crying. You have to put down your phone and go attend to them. Every second of what we call time to task completion that you take longer than you should is going to cost you money. So what the metric we tend to look at really is not conversion rate, but trying to look at kind of time to task completion, which is really let's shrink the amount of time it takes to complete your core task. And you can reduce that by 30, 40, 50%. That's going to translate directly into mobile revenue. Because if you look at the other flip side of the equation, conversion rate is generally kind of a combined metric. It's really your audience. It's the number of transactions you have divided by the number of visitors that you have. It's a compound metric. So with AMP and with PWAs, with the speed it takes now, that how much faster it loads, you actually will have a much larger audience, mainly because like your tracking pixel won't fire until the page generally loads. So you'll find that with these technologies, your audience size increases, and because you have a faster page, your search rankings also go up, which will also increase your audience size. So what we do find is sometimes we launch these sites and their conversion rate actually drops, and that tends to scare people because like, oh man, the conversion rate that I focused on for the last 3 years is dropping, but I'm also making more money, so that doesn't make sense. So that's why we try to stay away a bit from conversion rates, because it's one of many metrics you should look at, but really it's a compound metric, which makes it dangerous.
So we talked now a little bit about retailers that already started to improve their mobile experience. But how would you describe from your perspective, what is the state of mobile online retail currently? Are retailers finally going mobile first, right? So there is we were talking about that since years. At least this is my feeling, that you need to optimize for mobile, you need to optimize for mobile, you need to optimize for mobile. You should think mobile first. So what's your feeling about the current state in online retail, and where are we now, and how do you think things will look like in 2019?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think now we're at the state where most retailers are thinking mobile first, and then they intend to be mobile first if they haven't really gone under that transformation. And I think that the big push for that is finally we're seeing mobile traffic and in the next year or so, based on our projections, mobile revenue exceeding kind of desktop revenue. And so there's really now an impending deadline that says if you're not mobile first within the next year, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to have issues with your revenue. So I think with these emerging technologies, it's making it easier to be mobile first, and that's kind of the key. You have both the pressure of doing this before your traffic and revenue from mobile exceeds desktop, and before I think it was a bit tough to do. So I think that's where the web as a community kind of let down their users in the last couple of years, in that. Mobile caught the web by surprise. We had a couple things like responsive techniques to go shrink and squeeze pages, but beyond that, there's no really development in the web standards of what else can we do for mobile. So this time around, the momentum behind this is like, let's not get surprised by this ever again. Let's build the right technologies that build a great mobile experience. And so you can think mobile first. And what we're seeing now is because of the traffic changes in the market share of mobile device traffic, mobile is being treated as kind of a catalyst now to change teams to let them become more kind of digital. So mobile is being used as the kind of the excuse to be undergoing a digital transformation, because like mobile needs you to go a lot faster to keep up with it. So things are changing on mobile a lot faster than they ever did on desktop technologies, and the pace of change means your team needs to experiment with what's coming out constantly and see if that works for your shopper or not. So if you aren't used to launching a new release every day or feature flagging things and getting them out the door, and constantly measuring and experimenting with, okay, should I try this new payment request API? Should I try this new credentials management API? Do my shoppers care if I try to add in push notifications? If you can't experiment at the pace of that technology by becoming more agile, by becoming a digital organization, then that's a bad sign for your organization as well. So I don't think it's just mobile first as a retailer is focusing on that, but it's mobile first as a way to become truly agile, not in the sense of just Scrum agile kind of practice and process, but agile in the sense of like it's a digital organization that's willing to take risks and experiment and not just have this fixed roadmap of things I'm going to deliver, but say we're going to meander and try out things because that's what we need to figure out based on what our shoppers actually want.
So as retailers go mobile first, they run into a problem, right? And I think you talked about this a little bit, but there's clearly a mobile conversion gap, right? So desktop conversion is several times higher than mobile. And if retailers are now adopting a mobile first policy, a lot of times they get concerned about this conversion rate. So what's the reason for this gap fundamentally, right? Performance has historically been one. But now that we see things like the payment request API really taking off, what are the remaining gaps that need to be solved? Or is it just fundamentally a problem of people use mobile to browse but not necessarily shop? Just because they have their phones up doesn't mean that they're a possible paying customer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. There's still shoppers who just love going in store or still want to purchase on their laptop when they're at work or when they get home. And every shopper is going to be slightly different. So I don't think you can just say, hey, everyone's going to just go onto mobile and start buying stuff because we made the great experience. Like there's still other factors outside of just the device you're on. I think that goes back to similar to what we talked about for the native app side. You kind of still have to meet your customers where they are. So I think what we're going to predict is like the experience we bring on mobile is going to be the new experience people generally expect on the web. So what we're going to see is pressure to go bring that progressive experience onto tablet and onto desktop kind of experiences as well, screen sizes. So that you have a nice consistent experience regardless of which kind of touch point you're going through. And you need to start connecting them from a data perspective. So, if you have to be able to recognize who's just looking at products on mobile and then going to desktop and then figuring out how do you make their journey when they cross through those devices a lot easier. Because ultimately, it's still your customer. And if you're not going to address like where they're going to go to, they're just going to go to your other competitor instead of just purchasing on your mobile or desktop at all. So I think what we're seeing is mobile purchases probably are still going to lag, and that's okay because the way people shop is now just different. They're willing to pull out their phone and get that influence what they buy in store or what they buy later and put in their wish list for when they go home. And I think the problem with the industry right now is like you can't easily track and attribute that, and that just scares people. So I think whoever can actively solve that by saying, okay, when you have something on mobile and influences your other channels accurately, then that's kind of the big thing to solve next in this space, and do it accurately and not just with the models and projections.
So let's say I'm on a retailer, and now I decided to fully focus on my mobile experience. When should I build versus buy a progressive web app? So should I say, okay, I try to build that all on my own? What would be the reason for that? Or when should I purchase the application, for example, from Mobify, and then just customize it? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We obviously run into a lot during our sales cycles, and it really is dependent on your company. So we definitely have a good track record of smaller companies out there. A lot of startups, a lot of companies that are in emerging markets who get to start from scratch. They're the digital natives. They actually get to build this from nothing, which is great. So current state of things, there's a lot of great open source frameworks that you could start with. All the major single page applications have extensions where you can go build a progressive web app out of them, whether that's Angular or React or Vue and so on. And that is where a lot of startups will start, because they have the talent in-house. They have the roadmap in place and the funding in place to go spend as much of their time to build that out. And they're not held back by older systems that they have to work around. When we go up to the enterprise tier, the retail tier, that depends on how you structured your teams. What we do find is, some of our customers or prospects that come in the sales pipeline will try to run a POC and build a PWA internally. And they realize this is a lot of work, and we have a lot of other competing objectives. So I'd rather put my team working on these other priorities and then start their PWA based on a platform like Mobify's, which gets cool. You kind of shortcut a couple of months, and that may be worth it for you. But at other times, a lot of retailers will have actually a tech team who is highly skilled, highly capable of this, and they're super interested in trying to figure it out for their own. And that's cool. That's where you'll get like a lot of the other companies like Starbucks and Tinder and Facebook, the ones who are building it in-house. Okay, if you have the tech team and the skill level to do that, that's awesome. Go for it. But I think in the e-commerce space, that's rare to find. So that buy versus build discussion, for the most part, we probably would encourage you to try out a POC internally with your team and just see how hard or how easy it is, and be realistic about it. If you're going to be spending, a year and a half, 2 years kind of building this, and building at the level that you need from a global deployment and from a global kind of performance perspective, that's going to come at a cost. So that's where we are in the state of doing this. It's not completely easy yet. It's not completely turnkey. So keep that in mind when you're looking at build versus buy. It really does depend on your organization.
And for those who build on their own, what are the biggest barriers to adoption, right? So organizationally, what are the issues that they run into?
In this case, I think it's the need to constantly test, and based on our lessons of what we learned over the last couple of years of deploying PWAs, the pace of change in this space is tremendous. Like the amount of new APIs coming out, the way browsers are changing their support for certain APIs, Apple adding in service worker support all of a sudden out of the blue, means you need to be really good at testing every single permutation of combination of OS versions and browser versions and device types. It's no longer as simple as I could test desktop and I could test a mobile device and I'm done. You have to test a tablet in different orientations. You have older, Android OSs. You have now, different minor points of Safari versions, and it takes a lot of effort to go automate the testing, all that, to make sure that your very fractured shopper base that has all these different browser OS combinations won't run into any issues. A lot of this is fairly JavaScript heavy, and as if you've done this a few times in the past with a lot of JavaScript heavy sites, like the variation in support for what can be done in JavaScript tends to be very, very hard to catch all the edge cases. So if you don't have a great practice around automation, around testing, and doing that across all different devices, you're going to have a bunch of gaps that you can't really get great visibility into, then all of a sudden you're kind of going through, okay, I got to find this needle in the haystack and see, why is my checkout not performing the way I expected? Because, some older, version of Android on this weird tablet device is not working, and my data won't really show that in aggregate. So now I have to have my analytics team dig into that and help figure out why certain users aren't going through checkout. It gets really tough after a while. The other flip side of that is trying to measure and fine tune performance is a bit of an art now on mobile, and that takes a lot of time, a lot of expertise. And if you're used to tuning a desktop site and just kind of scaling that and getting great kind of initial page load times, in the mobile space, that's very different. It comes down to the smallest tricks and leveraging these types of APIs and technologies that we didn't see much of that challenge on the desktop side, because you could just crank up 3 other servers in a CDN and you're kind of done on desktop. Mobile is not like that. So you really have to predict how you can build out a team that's excellent at testing automation and excellent at just performance optimization to get the most out of this. And that is hard for a lot of teams, unfortunately, just based on the pressures that they're seeing.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, desktop sites, you're integrating with many e-commerce platforms and also solutions that had been built on the customer side. Are you seeing the trend of e-commerce platforms going headless and making it also easier for you to build your applications on top of that? Yeah,
it's a great question. And I know we've definitely talked about API-driven commerce, headless commerce for a while, where we're both very strong advocates in the space. So for us, we're probably not seeing it as much as we want. Out of our deployments and customer base, I would say like 10% at most have the right APIs in place to do this, to go purely headless. But that's still better than it was several years ago. So I think what we're going to see here is a gradual shift to increase that percentage of companies that are set up to have headless environments. And I think what trend is going to push that is for us, bringing progressive web apps to all the way to desktop is now you're going to have a single layer of progressive web apps as a way to create great experiences for all shoppers, regardless of device. If you are going to do that, that gives you a way to look at, okay, what is my architecture now? I no longer have to deliver my experiences through kind of a monolithic stack. I can actually now go through a separation of front end and back end. And I think what we've seen with our deployments now is we unlock the potential to go through that kind of headless commerce transformation, that architecture. And so with what we do, our solution is a little bit clever in that we can kind of transform your desktop site and turn it into a PWA without having to launch an API. But then we can go switch to the APIs you build in parallel as your team gets ready for that one. So we kind of unlock the ability to gradually adopt headless commerce by swapping out your backends or by standing up APIs in smaller chunks, and then just hooking that up to the PWA instead of expecting all that to have to be there up front. And that's great because you can then launch something in 3 months and then eventually kind of gradually migrate to headless. You get the benefits of having the revenue up front and just testing out a PWA with your user base. And for us in the tech space, we want to ship early, ship often. And we don't want to be held back by having a year-long API transformation project just to see that happen. So I think that's good. And what we're seeing, I think now is a lot more of the e-commerce platforms, the leaders in the space now promote that as a way to get to headless. So, I know Commerce Tools and Elasticpath have been great promoters of let's convert the whole thing to APIs. But now we're seeing the Magento team, and I guess by now the Adobe team start to add in GraphQL into their checkout to as a way to connect to their own PWA studio, and rolling that out. So we're starting to see a lot more adoption of headless commerce architectures geared for more production-like environments without having to go through this massive API program just to get it up and running. And so I have hope in that the next 2-3 years, based on what we're seeing across several vendors and other players in the space, that it becomes the dominant form of rolling out experiences in retail and e-commerce, and not just here's an interesting architecture that most only certain types of retailers or e-commerce players are going to adopt.
So you mentioned GraphQL. What are you seeing out there with it? Are people actually starting to adopt it?
It's definitely showing up a lot more. And you know, I'm not going to be so pedantic about, you know, you should use GraphQL versus REST versus other forms of API styles and architectures. I'm just happy to have APIs in general.
It's a good start.
It's a good start. GraphQL is fairly easy for developers like us and our partners to integrate, because it's very friendly for you to explore how do I get the right data I need without having to learn, you know, these 20 different REST endpoints. That's great because it's a great developer experience, and that to me is a strong reason to explore whether that's a viable option for you or not. I know, you know, there's a lot of arguments why GraphQL isn't great from, you know, various aspects of separation concerns and so on. But ultimately, you know, we have to respect that there's different types of developers out there. There's front-end developers that need to integrate, you know, different front ends in there. And so we need to pick the technology, the API kind of style and system that makes their lives easier, as opposed to here's the perfect API. And that's just us being practical with it. We need to launch projects in 3 months. Like I don't want to be held up by, you know, teams arguing over which type of API to release. Just
religious wars, right?
Yeah, we're not at that stage now.
Yeah, I hear it. One final question and then we'll wrap. But how's the tech scene in Canada? I have a lot of American friends moving up there. I have folks from other countries who would have otherwise moved to the US, but now are moving to Canada, and they love it.
Yeah,
what's your experience?
It's great, and you know, we're in Vancouver. I've been in Vancouver for about, I guess, 13 years. So Vancouver is a bit of a weird microcosm because we're on the west coast or the left coast, and so we're very close to Seattle and San Francisco and so on. So we get a lot of people coming back up after, you know, stints in either Seattle or the Bay Area after 5-6 years, and bring back a lot of their leadership and a lot of their learnings back up to Vancouver. So it's a strong startup scene, and we're starting to see a lot of kind of the venture-backed local companies start to see momentum. You know, obviously, you may have seen Elastic Path get their latest round of funding. You have obviously the Hootsuites out here. You have a bunch of other smaller product companies headquartered here that are getting up there in size and revenue, and are able to get that next round of funding. So we're starting to see a lot more investors in active in the local community, and we're starting to see a lot more local talents that have been coming back from their stints, you know, in the US and overseas. So I think that's great. I've been involved in like a kind of a local product community called Product BC, and it's just us trying to grow the next kind of set of product leaders, just because we know it's super important for growing, you know, kind of the Vancouver and the British Columbia tech scene. And so being very Canadian in nature, it's super friendly, super open, super helpful. There's less competition and less kind of ego in these kind of local groups of just product people. So I think that to me means we're going to have another round of great kind of Vancouver and Canadian based companies spin up. But at the same time, there's still challenges. You know, in Vancouver, cost of living is always a big one, and also we're starting to see a lot of pressure for local talents working remote for a lot of really cool companies out there. But what that means is they get a great lifestyle. They get, you know, great benefits to salary and stuff by working for, say, remote for an American company. But that means that they don't really contribute as much to the local tech community because they're working out of home offices and not going out and talking to other people, you know, solving similar problems in you know, the offices downtown or whatever. So it's going to be interesting dynamic for the next couple of years to see if that kind of remote working culture continues, and whether that is a good or bad thing for the local tech scene. You know, it's great for individuals, but is that going to inhibit the community from growing to the potential that it does have? Is going to be the thing to watch out for from my just kind of local perspective here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I think that was a great topic to close this episode, as we're already running to the end. Thank you so much, Drew, for sharing all the insights on mobile commerce. And we wish you, just a lot of success with all the next steps that are coming up. I think you're working on a great technology, and definitely mobile will lead over the next couple of years. So I think there's a lot of great things to come. So again, thanks for being with us on our podcast, and also thanks to Kelly on doing the podcast with me. And thanks to everybody that was listening into that episode.
Yeah, thanks everyone.